account of their enormous size were,
her body
I
pressed
think,
tightly
though the creatures were
to the
shown
wall,
disporting
trying to
like
process
fishes
what
in
had
the
just
water,
happened. She stared at the note, her
grotesque
trembling
beyond the
hands covering her
imagination of a
mouth,
Poe or a
tears
Bulwer.
welling up in her eyes.
They were
The two words,
glass.
smart girl, echoed in her
Curiously,
mind,
for one of
sending
the
chills
creatures
down
was
her
shown in the
spine.
act of killing
The
a whale,
silence of the early morning was
represented,
thick, almost suffocating.
but in a
She felt as if the world around her had frozen in time, the weight of fear and shock gripping her chest.
awestruck at the
How could this be real?
then,
How could her father's head
with
be
only a-
nailed to the door, staring at her lifelessly after hearing his voice, or what she thought was his voice? The dream.
It darted like a
father
stupendous
desperately
monster
tried
of
to warn
nightmares
her,
to the
his
mind,
voice straining, shouting over the noise of the
about
highway.
which it flung its
From
gigantic
the
scary
door,
arms,
the dream
the
had
while
saved
it
her
bowed
life.
its hideous
But
head and gave vent
what?
to certain measured
Behind the
sounds.
door that had taken her father from her, she knew she couldn't stay there. But where would she go?
I
What
think
could
I
she
went
do?
mad.
Her mind raced with terrifying questions.
Of my
Had
frantic
someone been
ascent to
watching
the
her? How long had they been planning this? And why leave that note? She needed help, but the fear of opening the door, even for a neighbor or the
I
police,
believe I
kept her frozen in place. What if it wasn't safe? What if this was part of some sick game, and whoever had done this was still out there,
have
waiting for her to make a wrong move?
attempt.
She tried to calm herself down, taking deep breaths. Her heart continued to pound uncontrollably. Slowly, she crawled to the nearest window,
When I
peeking
came
through the
out of the
curtains,
shadows,
searching the quiet
the-
street for any sign
in my
of
delirium,
movement.
I had
But
said
everything was
much,
still
but
eerily
found that my
so.
words had been
The
given
familiar
scant
sounds
attention.
of the early morning
of any-
neighborhood were absent.
Nor did
It
I.
was as if her home had been isolated from the rest of the world. Finally, she grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed the number for the police.
Once I sought out
the
a
line rang
celebrate
only
and
once before
amused
it
him.
connected, and she almost dropped the phone in her nervousness. 911, what's your emergency? The calm voice on the other end asked. Please, my dad, he's dead. Someone put his head on our door, the girl whispered, her voice breaking as the tears streamed
But
down
soon
her face.
perceiving that he
The dispatcher's tone immediately shifted, becoming more urgent but steady. Stay calm, sweetheart. Help is on the way. Can you lock yourself in a room and stay on the line with me until the police arrive? The girl nodded, though the dispatcher couldn't see her, and she hurried to her bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sat on the floor, clutching the phone to her chest, listening to the distant sound of sirens growing closer. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived. The flashing
at
lights
night,
filled the dark house
especially
as
when the
officers surrounded
I
the
tr-
area. She heard
the
them
tr-
banging on the front door, calling out her name. Sarah,
So
it's the
now-
police. We're here. You're safe now. With trembling legs, she unlocked her bedroom
Often,
door.
I
and
ask
walked
myself
cautiously
if it
toward
could
the front
not
of the
all
house.
have been
The sight
a
of
mere
uniformed
freak of
officers
fever
at the
as
door
I lay.
finally brought her sense of
This-
relief. The police broke the door
I
open.
cannot think of the deep
and as
sea
they
without
rushed in,
shuddering
they
at the
shielded her from
nameless
the horror
things that may
hanging
at this
on the other
very
side.
moment be crawling
Get her out of
and
here,
floundering
one of the
on its
officers
slimy,
ordered as another wrapped a
worshipping
blanket around Sarah's shaking body.
I
She was escorted
of
to
a
an
day when
ambulance
the land
outside,
shall sink
where paramedics
and the
checked
dark
on her,
ocean shall
asking
ascend
her questions
amidst
that barely
universal
registered in her mind.
pandemonium.
She was numb, the shock of everything sinking deeper into her. As the police started their investigation, one detective crouched down beside her. Sarah, he said softly, I know this is hard, but do you have any idea
end
who
is
could have done
near.
this? Anyone suspicious you've noticed recently? She shook her head, still in disbelief.
I hear
I don't know. There was no one. It was just me and my dad. The detective exchanged glances with his partner before asking
it
the
shall
next
not
question.
find me.
Did your dad mention anything unusual in the last few days? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him? Sarah hesitated, then remembered something.
God,
He
that
had been
hand!
acting strange lately, staying late at work, getting phone calls late at night. I never said much about it. I didn't think it was anything serious. The detective nodded, his expression darkening. We'll look into it. Meantime, I'm going to leave you somewhere safe. All right. As Sarah sat in the ambulance, her mind couldn't stop replaying the events of the night. Her father, the dream, the note. Who could have done something so horrifying? Then, her thoughts wandered back to the note. Smart girl. It wasn't a
counted their
random
enormous
message.
size.
Whoever
were,
had written
I
it
think,
knew
though
she'd
the
been
creatures
warned.
were shown disporting like
Either by
fishes
some
in the
strange
water,
premonition or somehow
grotesque
her father's
beyond the
final
imagination
act
of a
protection.
Poe or a
But
Bulwer.
what scared her most was that
They were
whoever had done this
glass.
wasn't finished. This was just the
Curiously,
beginning.
for one
The
of the
ambulance
creatures
lights
was shown in
flickered
the
against
act
the
of
early
killing a
dawn
whale,
as it sped away
represented,
from the house, taking Sarah to a
but in a-
safe place for the night. But no matter how far they drove, her mind stayed locked on that door, on her
Awestruck
father's
at the-
lifeless eyes staring through the
then,
peephole. The note,
with only
the warning, smart girl. The words were like a sinister whisper in the back of her mind.
loathsome. It
But
darted
help.
like a
Why did they
stupendous
leave her
monster of
alive?
nightmares to
At
the
the
mind,
hospital. She was checked over by the doctors,
about
but
which
no
it
amount
flung
of
its
physical
gigantic
examination
scaly
solved
claws,
her.
the while it bowed its
Detective who had
hideous head
spoken to her
and gave
earlier,
vent to certain
Detective
measured
Harlan,
sounds.
reappeared, offering her a cup of water as he sat beside her. We got officers stationed
I
at the
think
house.
I went mad.
I promise you, we're going to figure this out, he said,
Of my frantic
his voice
ascent.
steady but concerned. I need you to think hard, Sarah. Did your father have any enemies? Anyone who would want to hurt him? Sarah blinked, her thoughts
I
swirling
believe I-
in chaos. He never talked about work much. I know he had problems after my mom died, but he tried to keep things normal for me. He
I
did
have
mention
indis-
staying late sometimes,
But-
but I didn't think anything of it. Detective Harlan took notes, nodding as she spoke. You said something earlier about him acting strange. Did you notice any specific changes
When I came
in his
out of the
behavior?
shadows,
Anything recent?
brought the
Sarah
in
rubbed
my
her
delirium,
temples,
I had
the
said
weight
much,
of
but
exhaustion
found that my
pressing down
words
on
had
her.
been given
He
scant
got really
attention.
anxious a few
of
days
any-
ago. I saw him
Nor did
pacing at night, talking on the phone in hushed tones, but when I asked him about it, he just brushed it off. She looked up, her voice breaking. I never thought it was
Once
this
I
serious.
sought out a celebrate
Harlan's brow
and amused him.
furrowed. We'll need to check his phone records, see who he was talking to. I've already got a team combing through the house for evidence. Sarah bit her lip, another thought surfacing. There was something else. I had this dream. I know it sounds crazy, but I saw my dad in my dream last night, right before the doorbell
But
rang.
soon
He
perceiving
was
that
trying
he
to warn me not to open the door. He was shouting, but I could barely hear him. Harlan looked at her carefully. Dreams can be powerful. Sometimes they pick up on things we're already sensing subconsciously. But we'll stick to facts for now, all right? If it means something, we'll figure it out. Sarah nodded, her mind still tangled in the bizarre connection between the dream and reality. The fact that her father had been trying to warn her. It couldn't just be a coincidence, could it? Days passed, and
it is
Sarah
at
was
night,
kept in a safe
especially
house,
when the moon.
isolated
I
from the
try-
outside world
but the
as the
dr-
investigation deepened. Detective Harlan checked in on her
So
regularly, updating her on the progress. Though there wasn't much to tell, the police found no fingerprints
Often,
on the note.
I ask myself if it
signs
could
of
not
forced
all
entry.
have been
Nothing
a mere
unusual
freak of
in the
fever
surveillance
as I
footage
lay.
from nearby streets.
This,
It was as if the person who had done
I
this had
cannot
vanished
think of the
without a
deep sea
trace.
without shuddering
But then a week
at the
later,
nameless
something
things that
unexpected
may
happened.
this very
It
moment
was a
be
quiet
crawling
afternoon,
and floundering
Sarah was
on
sitting
its
by the
slimy,
window,
worshipping
staring out at the rain, when Harlan walked in, looking grimmer than usual.
of a day when the
"We
land
found
shall
something,"
sink
he
and
said,
the dark ocean
sitting
shall
down across
ascend
from her.
amidst
Your father's
universal
phone records
pandemonium.
came back. He'd been getting calls from an unknown number in the days leading up to his death. We traced the number to a burner phone, impossible to track further, but there was something else. Sarah's heart raced. What is it? Harlan
end is
hesitated
near.
before speaking. We found a message. It was sent to your father's phone the night he died, just hours
hear-
before. Everything happened. It's short, but it's unsettling. He handed her a printed copy of the message. You know the price.
It
The
shall
girl's
not
next.
find me.
Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The girl. That's me. Harlan nodded solemnly. We think your father might have been involved in something
God,
dangerous.
that hand!
Something he didn't want you to know about. But when he tried to back out, he made good on their threat. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the truth began to sink in. Her father had been trying to protect her. In the only way he could. But what had he gotten himself into? And who were these people that had taken him from her? Do you think they'll come for me? She whispered, her voice shaking. Harlan leaned forward, his expression serious but reassuring. We're not going to let that happen. I got my best people working on
Count
this.
of their enormous
but
size,
Sarah,
were,
I need you to
I
stay
think,
vigilant.
though the creatures
Whoever
were
did
shown
this, they're
disporting like
dangerous.
fishes in the water.
Keep you safe, but you need to trust us.
Grotesque beyond
Sarah
the
nodded,
imagination of a Poe
though
or
her
a
mind
Bulwer.
was far from calm.
They were
There was still so much
glass.
she didn't understand.
Curiously,
Why her father?
for
Why
one of the
now?
creatures was
And
shown
what
in
did
the
they
act
want
of
from
killing
her?
a whale,
That night,
represented.
Sarah lay in bed, her thoughts
but in a-
racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to all of this. Something her father had been trying to protect her
Awestruck at
from. Even beyond death. And then,
with
as she
only-
drifted off to sleep, another dream came. This time, she wasn't on a highway. She was standing in a dark street, walls closing in around her.
It darted like a stupendous
Shadowed
monster of
figure
nightmares
stood,
to the monolith,
watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce through her
about
soul.
which it flung its
Stepped
gigantic scaly
forward.
arms,
As it
while
did,
it bowed its hideous
familiar
head
voice of her
and
father
gave vent
echoed
to
in her
certain
ears.
measured
Sarah,
sounds.
we need to find it before they do. She jolted awake, her heart pounding. The dream
I
was
think
different
I
this
went
time.
mad.
More vivid, more real. But what
Of
did it
my
mean?
frantic ascent
Find
to the-
what? Determined, Sarah sat up, her mind racing. There had to be something her father had hidden. Something the killers were after. And
I
she was going
believe
to find it, no matter what. But as she stood to look out the window, a sense of dread washed over her. Across the street, parked in the shadows,
I have
was a dark car.
Attempt-
Unreal, barely visible in the dim light. There was a figure watching her. The chase had already begun. Sarah's pulse quickened as she stared out the window. Her eyes locked
When
on
I
the
came
dark
out of
car.
the shadows,
The figure inside
broad day-
remained motionless,
in my delirium,
barely
I had
illuminated by
said
the dim
much,
street
but
lights.
found that my
But
words
its
had been
presence
given
was enough
scant
to send
attention.
chills down her
of any-
spine. She took a step
Nor
back
did
from
I-
the window, her breath catching in her throat. She reached for her phone and immediately called Detective Harlan. The line rang once,
Once
twice,
I sought out to
and then he
celebrate
answered,
and
his
amused
voice
him.
steady but alert. Sarah, what's going on? There's a car outside, she whispered, her voice trembling. Someone's watching me. Harlan's tone shifted, becoming sharp. Stay away from the window. We'll send a unit to your location right now. Don't do anything rash,
But soon
all right?
perceiving that he
Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Okay. As she hung up the phone, her mind raced. The figure in the car, it couldn't be a coincidence. Whoever it was, they were connected to her father's death, the message on his phone, and now to her. But why? What did they want from her? Pacing the room, Sarah thought about her father's last message in her dream. Find it before they do. What had he meant by that? What could her father have possibly hidden that these people wanted so badly? She
It
had
is at
searched his
night,
belongings after his
especially
death,
when the
but nothing
I try-
seemed out of the ordinary.
But the
Suddenly it hit her. The box. Her father
So
had
now-
kept a small, locked metal box in his office, hidden behind stacks of old paperwork.
Often,
She had found it
I
once
asked
when she was
myself
younger,
if it could
but when
not
she
all
asked
have
him
been
about it, he brushed her off,
mere freak
saying
of
it was just
fever
old
as I
family
lay.
documents.
This,
At the time, she hadn't thought much
I
of it.
cannot think of
but
the
now,
deep sea without
with everything that
shuddering
had happened,
at the nameless
that box
things
seemed
that
like the
may
key
at this
to
very
everything.
moment be
She
crawling
grabbed her
and
coat
floundering on its
and made her
slimy.
way quietly toward
worshipping
the door. The safe house was only a few miles from her old home.
Of a day when the land
father's
shall
house,
sink,
and
and
she
the
had to get
dark
to that
ocean
box
shall
before
ascend
anyone else did.
amidst
As she
universal
slipped out the back door
pandemonium.
and into the night, the cold air bit at her skin, but she pushed forward. The streets were quiet, too quiet, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way through the shadows, hoping
The
the
end
figure
is
in the
near.
car hadn't noticed her leave. When she finally reached her old home, Sarah slipped the key into the lock and
I hear-
quietly opened the door. The house smelled faintly of her father's cologne, a scent that used to bring her comfort, but now only served to remind her of everything
It
she
shall
had
not
lost.
find me.
She moved swiftly, her footsteps light as she made her way to his office. The box was still there, exactly where she remembered it,
God,
behind a stack
that
of books on
hand!
the bottom shelf. She pulled it out and set it on her father's desk, her fingers trembling as she searched for something to break the lock. Finding a small crowbar in the garage, she pried the box open with a loud crack. Inside, she found a collection of papers, old letters, photographs, and a few documents she didn't recognize. But one item stood out. A small, black USB drive wrapped in a piece of paper. The paper had something scrawled on it in her father's handwriting. For Sarah.
account of
Trust
their
no one.
enormous size,
Her hands
were,
shook
I
as she
think,
picked up
that
the
the
drive.
creatures were shown
What was on
disporting
it?
like fishes
And why
in
had
the
her
water.
father been so desperate to hide it from everyone,
Grotesque
even
beyond
her?
the imagination
Just as
of
she
a
was about to
Poe or a
leave,
Bulwer.
she heard a creak
They
in the
were
hallway.
glass.
She froze, her heart
Curiously,
leaping into her throat.
that one of the creatures
Someone
was
else
shown
was
in
in
the
the
act of
house.
killing a whale,
Sarah stuffed the USB
represented
drive into her pocket,
but
and
in
quickly extinguished
so-
the light. She pressed her back against the wall, listening as soft footsteps approached.
awestruck at
Her
the
breath hitched.
I,
She
then,
forced herself to stay
with
calm.
only
The footsteps drew closer, then stopped just outside the office door. There was a long silence. Almost felt the presence of someone
loathsome.
standing
It
just
darted
inches
like a
away on the other
stupendous
side.
monster of nightmares to the mind,
Slowly, the door began to creak open.
about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head
No time to
and gave
think.
vent to
Grabbing a
certain
heavy
measured
book from her
sounds.
father's desk, she held her breath and waited, every muscle in her body tense.
I think
As the
I
door
went
swung
mad.
open, she caught a glimpse of a figure, a
my
man
frantic
tall and
ascent
dressed
to the-
in dark clothes. Before she lunged forward, slamming the book into his shoulder. The man grunted in surprise, stumbling backward.
I
Sarah
believe I-
didn't wait for him to recover. She bolted out of the office, sprinting down the hall toward the front door. The man shouted after her, his footsteps pounding as he gave chase.
I have
Sarah was faster.
Attempt.
She flung the door open and ran out into the night, her legs pumping as adrenaline surged through her veins. She could hear the man gaining on her, his footsteps echoing in the quiet streets.
When I came out of the
Panic
shadows,
threatened to overtake her,
brought the
but she forced
in
herself
my
to
delirium,
focus.
I had
She
said
couldn't
much,
stop now.
but found that
She
my
couldn't let
words
him
had been
catch
given
her.
scant attention.
Up ahead,
Of
she
any,
saw the headlights of a car
Nor did I-
approaching. It wasn't the dark car from earlier. It was a police car, sirens off but lights flashing in the distance. Detective Harlan must have
once
sent
I
backup
sought out to
after all.
celebrate
With
and
one
amused him.
final burst of energy, Sarah sprinted toward the police car, waving her arms frantically. The officers inside saw her and pulled over just as the man behind her slowed. Realizing he'd been caught, the officers jumped out of the car, weapons drawn. "Get on the ground!" One of them
But
shouted
soon
at the
perceiving
man,
that
who hesitated for a split second before raising his hands and dropping to his knees. Sarah collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping for breath. One of the officers rushed over to her, his expression full of concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, her heart still racing. I found something. My father, he left me something." As the officers cuffed the man and led him away, Sarah pulled the USB drive from her pocket, clutching it tightly. Whatever was on this drive,
It is at
it was
night,
worth killing for.
especially when the
And
mo-
now, it was
I
up to her
try-
to figure out why.
But the dr-
She glanced over the man being led away and saw the
So
same
now-
note of cold calculation in his eyes. Whoever was behind this wasn't finished with her yet. "Get me to
Often,
Harlan,"
I asked
she
myself
said
if it
to the
could not
officer
all
beside
have been
her. "We have
a
work
mere
to do."
freak of
As
fever
the car
as I
drove off
lay.
into the night,
This,
Sarah knew that her father's warning had
I
saved her
cannot
life
think of
once.
the deep sea without
Now,
shuddering
it was
at the
time to
nameless
uncover the
things that
secrets
may
he
at
had
this
died
very
for.
moment be